The small-town courtroom was packed with people. The air buzzed with murmurs as Judge William Harrington walked in and sat behind his large wooden desk. His face was stern, and his eyes scanned the room with an air of authority. Known for being tough and unyielding, Judge Harrington had a reputation for delivering harsh sentences. Some people whispered that his judgments were often unfair, especially toward people who didn't look like him. In front of him stood Alana Davis, a young black woman in her late 20s. Alana wore a simple but professional outfit, her head held high and her posture calm. She had been accused of a minor offense, a dispute over a parking ticket that escalated unnecessarily. What should have been a routine matter had spiraled out of control when Alana refused to accept blame for something she hadn't done. Alana's lawyer, a local advocate named Laura Green, argued passionately on her behalf. "Your Honor," Laura said, "the evidence clearly shows that Ms. Davis was not in the wrong. The situation has been exaggerated, and we request a fair and reasonable resolution." Judge Harrington barely glanced at the documents in front of him. He had already made up his mind. "Ms. Davis," he said, his voice cold, "your refusal to cooperate with the authorities shows a lack of respect for the law. I believe a strong message needs to be sent here." Alana's heart sank as the judge continued. "I hereby sentence you to 1 year of community service and a fine of $5,000. Gasps filled the room. The punishment was far harsher than anyone had expected for such a minor case. Alana's lawyer protested immediately. "Your Honor, this is excessive and—" The judge raised his hand to silence her. "My decision is final," he said firmly. Alana, however, didn't lose her composure. She looked directly at the judge, her voice steady. "Thank you for your ruling, Your Honor. I'll serve the sentence, but I want you to remember this moment. You'll learn who I am soon enough." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, the judge seemed caught off guard. He quickly dismissed the case and moved on, pretending not to be affected. Alana quietly walked out of the courtroom with her lawyer, leaving the room buzzing with curiosity about her mysterious statement. As Alana stepped into the sunlight outside the courthouse, she felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, but also determination. She knew this was more than just a personal fight. It was about standing up to a system that often treated people like her unfairly. Alana's resolve hardened. She had a plan, and Judge Harrington was about to find out who she really was. This opening sets the stage with tension and intrigue, introducing the main characters and conflict while keeping the reader engaged. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. The courtroom buzzed long after Alana Davis left. People whispered about the sentence Judge Harrington had handed down. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others quietly left, unwilling to challenge the judge's authority. It was clear to everyone that the punishment didn't fit the crime. Alana had been accused of a minor offense, yet she was being treated like a serious criminal. Judge Harrington, sitting in his chambers, felt no regret. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee and reviewing his next case. In his mind, he had done the right thing. To him, Alana's calm defiance in the courtroom was a sign of disrespect. "People like her need to learn discipline," he muttered to himself, unaware of how his words reflected his own bias. Meanwhile, Alana and her lawyer, Laura Green, were walking down the courthouse steps. Laura was fuming. "This is outrageous," she said, shaking her head. "I can't believe he gave you that sentence. We should appeal." Alana remained calm, her expression unreadable. "No, Laura," she said firmly. "Let it be. This isn't just about me. It's about something bigger. I have a plan." Laura looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "That judge needs to be held accountable for what he did to you." Alana stopped and turned to face her lawyer. "He will be," she said softly, "but not the way you're thinking." Alana's confidence puzzled Laura, but she trusted her client. Alana had always been composed and thoughtful, even under pressure. Laura had learned that Alana never said anything without a purpose. She nodded slowly and decided to follow Alana's lead. That evening, Alana sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. She began making calls to her family and close friends, explaining what had happened in court. Each conversation was met with shock and outrage, but Alana reassured them. "Don't worry," she said. "I know what I'm doing." Alana's father, Samuel Davis, was particularly concerned. As a retired civil rights lawyer, he had seen many cases of injustice like this. "Are you sure you don't want me to step in?" he asked. "No, Dad," Alana replied firmly. "I need to handle this myself. For now." At the same time, Judge Harrington went home feeling accomplished. He shared his day's work with his wife, boasting about how he had taught a lesson to someone who needed to be put in her place. His wife nodded politely but didn't share his enthusiasm. Unbeknownst to the judge, Alana was already working to uncover his history. With her connections in the community and her father's guidance, she began gathering evidence. Old cases, dismissed complaints, and patterns of behavior that had gone unnoticed were suddenly coming into focus. Alana smiled to herself as she looked at the stack of notes growing on her desk. "You thought I was just another name on your docket," she whispered. "You're about to find out who I really am." The next morning, Alana woke up early, determined to begin her work. She sat at her desk with a cup of coffee and opened her laptop. Her father, Samuel Davis, had already sent her a few documents he managed to pull from his contacts. Alana knew this wouldn't be an easy task, but she was ready for the challenge. She began by researching Judge Harrington's record. His rulings over the years revealed a troubling pattern. Time and time again, his sentences were harsher for certain groups of people, especially minorities. Alana couldn't help but feel a knot of anger in her stomach as she read the stories of others who had suffered similar injustices. By midday, she had collected enough information to see the bigger picture. Judge Harrington's decisions weren't just unfair, they were part of a larger system that allowed people like him to act without accountability. She knew exposing him wouldn't fix everything, but it would be a start. Alana reached out to Laura, her lawyer, and shared what she had found. "This is serious," Laura said, scrolling through the files. "If we present this to the right people, it could lead to a formal investigation." Alana nodded. "That's the goal. But we need to be careful. If we rush this, it might backfire. I want to build a strong case, not just against him, but against the system that protects him." Meanwhile, Judge Harrington went about his day as if nothing was wrong. He presided over more cases, delivering his judgments with the same confidence he always had. In his mind, the sentence he gave Alana was already in the past. He never imagined that she was quietly working to expose him. As the days passed, Alana began to reach out to people in her community. She visited a local activist group and shared her story. They were immediately supportive and offered to help spread the word. "People need to know what's happening," one of the group leaders said. "We've been trying to fight these kinds of injustices for years." Alana's case quickly became a rallying point for the community. People who had once been afraid to speak out against the judge started coming forward with their own stories. A retired police officer even reached out to Alana, sharing details about how Harrington had ignored important evidence in past cases to fit his narrative. Alana's father watched proudly as his daughter's efforts began to gain momentum. "You've always been brave," he told her during a late-night phone call. "But remember to take care of yourself too. This fight is important, but so are you." "Don't worry, Dad," Alana replied. "I've got this." As the evidence against Judge Harrington grew, Alana's determination only deepened. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she was ready. The judge had underestimated her, and soon the truth would come to light. As the days passed, Alana's quiet determination began to ripple across the community. What started as her personal fight against injustice had grown into something much larger. The more people heard about her story, the more they rallied around her. Calls and emails poured in from individuals who shared similar experiences with Judge Harrington, each one adding fuel to the growing fire. Alana worked tirelessly, gathering testimonies and organizing the evidence with the help of her lawyer, Laura, and her father, Samuel. Each new piece of information painted a clearer picture of Judge Harrington's biased rulings. He had sentenced people unfairly, dismissed important evidence, and shown a pattern of prejudice that could no longer be ignored. One afternoon, Alana attended a meeting with a local activist group that had been fighting for judicial reform for years. The group's leader, an older woman named Rosa Martinez, welcomed Alana warmly. "Your story is shining a light on something we've all known for too long," Rosa said. "People are finally paying attention." The group offered to help organize a rally to bring attention to Judge Harrington's actions. Alana hesitated for a moment. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but she realized that her story had the power to inspire change. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady. "It's time to make our voices heard." Meanwhile, Judge Harrington remained unaware of the storm brewing around him. In his courtroom, he continued to deliver harsh sentences with the same confidence as always. To him, Alana was just another defendant, and her case was already forgotten. But that changed when he began noticing the whispers in the courthouse. Clerks exchanged glances when he walked by, and some lawyers started challenging his decisions more boldly. One morning, he opened the local newspaper and was shocked to see a headline about his controversial rulings. The article highlighted Alana's case and included quotes from community members calling for an investigation into his behavior. For the first time, Judge Harrington felt a flicker of unease. He dismissed it quickly, telling himself it was just media nonsense, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The rally organized by Rosa's group was held in front of the courthouse on a sunny Saturday morning. Hundreds of people showed up, holding signs that read, "Justice for all, and no more bias in the courts." Alana stood at the center, surrounded by her supporters. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. "My name is Alana Davis," she began. "I am not just a defendant. I am a person, a daughter, and a fighter for justice. What happened to me in that courtroom is not just my story. It's the story of too many others." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy electrifying the air. Alana felt a surge of hope. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the odds. The rally outside the courthouse became the spark that ignited a media firestorm. Pictures of Alana speaking passionately to the crowd and signs demanding justice spread across social media. News outlets picked up the story, and within days, it became a national conversation. People from across the country began to learn about Judge Harrington's courtroom practices and the biased system he represented. Alana's phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted interviews, activists wanted her support, and people she had never met called to thank her for standing up. Though overwhelmed, Alana remained focused. She knew this attention wasn't just about her. It was about bringing change to a system that had failed so many. One evening, Alana appeared on a popular news show. Sitting across from the host, she spoke calmly but firmly about her experience. "This isn't just my story," she said. "It's about a pattern of injustice that's gone unchecked for too long. Judge Harrington is only one part of a larger problem." The host nodded. "And what do you hope to achieve with this movement?" they asked. "I want accountability," Alana replied. "Not just for Judge Harrington, but for all those who abuse their power. We need reforms to ensure fairness for everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from." The interview went viral, drawing even more attention to the case. Soon after, national organizations joined the cause. Civil rights groups, legal advocates, and even some lawmakers began calling for an investigation into Judge Harrington. His name became synonymous with outdated practices and systemic bias, and the pressure on him grew with each passing day. Back in Ridgewood, Judge Harrington couldn't escape the storm. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse daily, chanting and holding signs that called for his resignation. Even his colleagues began to distance themselves from him, unwilling to be associated with the growing scandal. At home, the judge tried to maintain his composure, but cracks were beginning to show. He avoided watching the news, but his wife couldn't ignore it. One evening, as they sat in their quiet living room, she turned to him and asked, "William, did you ever think this might happen?" He frowned. "What are you talking about? You've been in that courtroom for decades," she said gently. "Do you really believe you've treated everyone fairly?" Judge Harrington didn't respond. For the first time, he found himself questioning his decisions, not just the one involving Alana, but all the others he had made over the years. Meanwhile, Alana continued working tirelessly. With the help of her lawyer, Laura, and her father, Samuel, she compiled evidence for a formal complaint against Judge Harrington. The file included testimonies, case records, and a detailed analysis of his sentencing patterns. It was a powerful case, and Alana was ready to present it. As the media attention grew and the community rallied behind her, Alana felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she believed real change was within reach. Judge Harrington sat in his chambers, his mind clouded with frustration and disbelief. The once quiet routine of his life had turned into a whirlwind of public scrutiny and protest. He had always thought of himself as untouchable, confident in his authority and decisions. But now his name was plastered across news headlines, and his every ruling was being questioned. That morning, he received a sealed envelope marked confidential. It was from the state's Judicial Oversight Board. Inside was a formal notification that an investigation into his conduct had been opened. His record, rulings, and courtroom behavior were all under review. Harrington felt the walls closing in, but he still clung to the belief that this was all a misunderstanding fueled by angry activists. Later that week, he was invited to speak at a local community event celebrating the town's history. The invitation had been sent months ago, and despite the controversy, he decided to attend, hoping to present himself as the dedicated judge he believed he was. The event took place in a large auditorium filled with town officials, community leaders, and citizens. Harrington walked onto the stage with his usual air of confidence, but he couldn't ignore the murmurs from the crowd. As he began his speech about fairness and justice, he noticed a familiar face in the audience, Alana Davis. At first, he barely recognized her. She wasn't wearing the modest attire from the courtroom. Instead, she stood out in a sharp professional outfit that radiated confidence. Harrington's voice faltered slightly, but he pressed on, determined to finish his speech. When he concluded, the event's organizer stepped up to the podium. "Thank you, Judge Harrington, for your words," the organizer said. "And now, it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, Ms. Alana Davis." The audience erupted in applause as Alana walked to the stage. Harrington froze in his seat, realizing too late that this was no ordinary event. Alana began her speech by sharing her experience in his courtroom, describing the harsh sentence she had received and the impact it had on her life. "But this isn't just about me," Alana said, her voice steady but firm. "This is about a system that has allowed people in power to act without accountability for far too long. And tonight, I stand here not just as a defendant, but as an advocate for change." She then shared the evidence she and her team had gathered, outlining the patterns of bias in Judge Harrington's rulings. The crowd listened intently, some gasping in shock at the details. Alana ended with a powerful statement. "Fairness and justice should never depend on the color of someone's skin or their background. We deserve better." The audience gave her a standing ovation. Harrington sat in stunned silence, realizing the full weight of what was happening. For the first time, he saw Alana not as a defendant, but as a force for change. Judge Harrington left the community event feeling a sense of unease he had never experienced before. Alana Davis's words echoed in his mind, each one pulling at the certainty he once had in his decisions. For the first time in his career, he couldn't brush off the criticism as baseless complaints. Her evidence had been too compelling, her argument too sharp to ignore. Back at his office, Harrington found an email waiting for him. It was from the Judicial Oversight Board, requesting a formal meeting to review the allegations against him. His heart sank. He had faced minor complaints in the past, but nothing like this. Now, his entire career was being questioned, and the public was watching closely. Meanwhile, Alana continued her work, determined to push the movement forward. With the help of her lawyer, Laura, and her father, Samuel, she submitted the official complaint against Judge Harrington. The file included a thorough analysis of his past cases, showing clear patterns of bias in his sentencing. Testimonies from people who had faced similar injustices under his rulings added a powerful emotional weight to the evidence. The media coverage only intensified. National news outlets picked up the story, diving into the larger issues of judicial bias and systemic inequality. Alana's name became synonymous with the fight for fairness, and her calm but determined demeanor inspired many. "She's standing up not just for herself but for all of us," one activist said during an interview. The public outcry reached a boiling point. Protests outside the courthouse grew larger, with people holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Accountability now." The pressure on Harrington was impossible to ignore. Even his colleagues began to distance themselves from him, quietly suggesting that he step down to preserve what little dignity he had left. Despite everything, Harrington clung to the belief that he could weather the storm. But that changed when the Oversight Board released a preliminary report to the public. The report highlighted troubling inconsistencies in his rulings and criticized his lack of impartiality. It was a damning assessment, and it left Harrington with few options. At home, his wife confronted him. "William, you need to face the truth," she said softly. "You've made mistakes, big ones. Maybe it's time to step away." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He sat in silence, staring at the floor. Deep down, he knew she was right, but admitting it felt like admitting failure. For a man who had built his identity around being a figure of authority, the idea of stepping down was unbearable. Meanwhile, Alana prepared for her next move. She wasn't just focused on Harrington anymore. She wanted broader reforms to ensure that no one else would face the same injustices. With the support of the community and national organizations, she drafted proposals for judicial training and accountability measures. The stage was set for a final confrontation, one that would determine not only Harrington's fate, but the future of the system he represented. The morning was cold and overcast as Judge Harrington walked into the courthouse for what would likely be the most pivotal day of his career. The Oversight Board hearing was being held in a packed room, with reporters, activists, and community members all in attendance. Among them was Alana Davis, sitting in the front row with her lawyer and father by her side. Her presence was a quiet but powerful reminder of the fight that had brought them all there. As the hearing began, the lead investigator from the Oversight Board presented their findings. "Our review of Judge Harrington's rulings has revealed a troubling pattern of biased decision-making, disproportionately affecting minority defendants," she said. "This behavior undermines public trust in the judiciary and must be addressed." The evidence was laid out methodically, case after case where Harrington had handed down harsher sentences than necessary, ignored mitigating factors, or dismissed key evidence. Testimonies from those who had suffered under his rulings painted a vivid picture of the harm caused by his decisions. Harrington sat silently, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He wanted to defend himself, to argue that he had always acted in the best interest of the law, but the evidence was overwhelming. Deep down, he knew he had failed to live up to the principles of fairness and justice he claimed to represent. When it was Alana's turn to speak, the room fell silent. She stood at the podium, her voice steady and clear. "This isn't about revenge," she began. "It's about accountability. The decisions made in that courtroom have real consequences for people's lives. We deserve judges who are fair, impartial, and committed to justice for all." Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Even some of Harrington's peers looked at him with disappointment, as if finally seeing the flaws they had overlooked for years. At the end of the hearing, the Oversight Board announced their decision. Judge Harrington would step down from his position immediately, and his record would undergo further review. The room erupted in applause, not out of celebration, but relief that justice was finally being served. Harrington walked out of the courthouse feeling a mixture of shame and regret. He had spent decades believing he was untouchable, but now he realized the weight of his actions. Quietly, he decided to dedicate his retirement to learning and reflecting, hoping to better understand the harm he had caused. For Alana, the day marked not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. Her fight had exposed one judge's bias, but it also sparked a movement for broader judicial reform. Through her foundation, she worked tirelessly to advocate for fairer systems, focusing on training programs for judges and initiatives to promote diversity in the legal field. As the weeks turned into months, Ridgewood began to change. The courthouse implemented new policies to ensure accountability, and Alana's story continued to inspire people across the country. Though the fight for justice was far from over, her efforts proved that one voice, when determined and supported by a community, could make a difference.